Hello, fans of Learnivore. Today I'm going to be teaching you some of the basics from chess. I've known how to play chess my whole life, and it's basically been how the pieces work, some of the basic strategy, and things like that. But last year I went really in depth and tried to become basically as good as I can at the game. And my goal is to show you in 4 weeks how to go from the point from like no knowledge of chess at all to be able to play a competitive game and beat almost most people you see on the streets if they ever challenge you at the game. So diving right in, right here I have a nice glass chess set. It's a little chipped up. You have this rook, which is a little broken, and this knight without a head, which could be considered a headless horseman. So basically, these are all the pieces, and just going through and showing how they work. We'll start off with the pawn, which you have most of. Actually, but first with the setup. What you have is a white side and a black side. It doesn't really matter in this set, but what really sets it off is that white goes first. And generally, if you have a choice, sometimes people have a side that they're most comfortable with, but most of the time at higher levels, white has like a slight advantage, maybe like 1%. It doesn't make like a huge difference, but generally white is the one that dictates the pace of the game, and black is the one that has to respond to it, because like white will make the first move and choose their opening, so black generally has to play according to that. But it's not the end of the world if you have black. It's only like 1%, and that you could easily be more comfortable with black, which means it's not going to make a huge difference, especially starting out right now. And you are going to have to play both sides. Obviously, it's generally decided by a coin flip, so you can't be like a one-trick pony that only knows how to play one side. So it evens out in the end, is all I'm saying. Now you have 8 pawns in the front, in the second row of your side, and then behind that you have your special pieces, I guess, which will be, so this is a pawn. This is short and generally looks like this. This is a rook. You have 2 on each side, protect on the corner pieces, and then a knight, or also called the rook is also called a castle. The knight is sometimes called a horse or anything like that. A bishop, always called a bishop. And these 3 are going to separate the 2 main pieces on each side, so they'll be symmetrical. And then on the queen side, this is the queen, and she's always going to be on the same color. So I've designated the clear pieces as black. It's sort of like, it doesn't, I guess it kind of looks clear. So I'm calling these black, so I have them on the darker square for this setup. So the queen is always going to be on the same color. So the black queen, in like most sets, she's actually going to be like solid black, is going to be on the black square. And then the king goes on the opposite square. So this black king would be on the white square. And that's how it goes. So you have rook, knight, bishop. Then you have the queen if it's the black, if it's on the black side, or the king if it's on the white side, which would be like that. I mean, they're always like facing each other as well. So then you have the king, the bishop, the knight, the rook, and in front of all these pieces you have the pawns. And then on the white side is basically mimic, completely, they should always be facing each other. There's no mix-up at all. And going through how the pieces work now, we'll start off with the pawns since you have 8 of them. They can go they move one at a time after their starting position, but if they are in the first spot and they haven't been moved yet, then they can either choose to go 1 or 2. Again, if they haven't moved yet and they're in this starting area, they can either go up 1 space or they can go up 2 spaces. And this gives some more variety to the game. It generally, if they are closer to you, then they are more defensive because they're protecting your pieces, and the enemy would have to get closer to have some sort of action. And if they're going out 2 spaces, it's being more aggressive, controlling, like they're attacking these 2 spaces right here, because while they move forward, they attack diagonally in these 2 spaces right here. So if there was like a bishop right here and it was my turn over here, I could take the bishop here, but because it's like diagonal. But if the bishop was in front of me, I couldn't even move this pawn and I could not take it. It's kind of hard to see, so I'll do it on the other side. So if I have this pawn out 2 spaces right here, and say I have a knight in front of it, and it's black's turn. The pawn is currently being blocked by the knight, because it can only move straight, but it can't take it. But if the knight was to the side of the pawn, then the pawn could take it, and then it would be moving sideways in order to do that. Because whenever you capture a piece, it takes over that piece's position on the board. And this is true for any piece. So you basically like take over its position. And in chess, like the pieces never come back once they're like in the graveyard. Like you can't summon them back unless there's like a special condition, which we'll get to later. And so after that, we'll go over the rook. The rook is a simple piece. It's also very powerful. It can move horizontally or vertically. That's it. So if it's in this spot, you can either move up, down, left, right. It can't jump over anything or anything like that. It can attack in those directions as far as the board is. So if I have a rook right here and a pawn right here, since it's in the same row, it's completely to the right, it's completely horizontal, the rook can go to the other side of the board to capture this pawn. So it's generally a powerful piece, but you want to keep it towards the end of the game because you have like all these pawns, and if you have a chess game with like all the pawns in the middle, the rook isn't going to do much action because there aren't these like straight paths that it can defend. So you generally want to leave it later. And then with the knight is a special piece because it can jump. It's the only piece that can jump over other pieces. So the way it moves is, the way I remember it is 1, 2, and to the side. Some people call it an L shape. Some people say, I learned it was like a candy cane because like the spaces are checkered. There's a lot of ways to remember it. So basically it goes 2 spaces, then 1 to the left or right. So it's going to make sort of like a circle shape if you want to like analyze how it would look and the general scope of things, because it can go 2 spaces into the side in any direction. So if it was here, it could go here, here, or it could go here, here, or here, here, and all that. So it's a strong piece. It does a lot of like special moves, and it can like, because it can attack all these different spaces, it can like attack multiple things at once in such a wide variety of ways. And that's powerful, as you'll see once we get into that later. The bishop moves diagonally. Since you have 2 of them, unlike the knight and rook, they can't be like interchanged. They can't like do the same things, because once they start off on a white or like a light or dark square, then they are going to be stuck to that the whole game naturally, because you can't like go diagonally into a different color. So a bishop is just going to be like a rook that can only go diagonally. It has a lot of like, it's basically like one of the strongest pieces in the early game because it can attack a piece directly, and it like does a good job of defending things from far away. It's basically everything a rook like aims to be in the like later parts of the game in the earlier parts, because even if you have like a big like array of pieces in the center, you can always find those like straightaways to cut through with a bishop, and that's very helpful early on in getting a lead. Now with the queen, it's basically a bishop plus a rook. So it's able to move horizontally, move vertically, and move diagonally. And it can move, and unlike a bishop, it can like switch spaces as well. So if it like moved horizontally to a dark square from a light square, it could just take over from there. The queen is probably the most powerful piece in the game by itself. And a big mistake that a lot of beginners make is like bringing out their queen like early in the game. And it's very tempting and it can be powerful. Like if you want to play extremely aggressively, it is something that you can do and probably win a few games. But once you get to like higher levels of play, the like general idea is to like leave your queen in place or like barely move it for as long as possible. And only once like you lose a couple knights, you lose a rook, you lose a bishop, and something like that happens, then you bring out the queen to like compensate for that power. And maybe if you get like a subtle piece advantage, like maybe you have one more knight than they do, you can use the queen to like power through on that, and it's generally very powerful in the end of the game. And for that reason, it should be kept till the end. And with the king is the most important piece in the game, but it's probably the weakest piece in the game. It can move and attack any piece any square it touches directly. So if it moves from here, 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 like a little like square around it. So you want to keep, like, the general idea of chess is to keep the king alive as long as possible. If you can't keep the king alive, you lose the game. So if your king like has trouble moving, like it can't like go from one end of the board to the other. So these pieces, all these other pieces are designed to like keep it safe. So your king is the weakest, but it's also the most important. The chess is like the oldest game in the world, and it's designed around war. And the king is basically like the commander or like the general. And if you lose your general, your army like doesn't know what to do. And for that reason, like the chess echoes the same idea. So now that you know how the pieces work, there's still like a general understanding that's mixed. Like you may be wondering, how do I win at chess? Well, it like has to do with the king. It's the most important piece of the game because if it gets like stuck, if it can't move at all, and we call that checkmate. If that happens, then you lose the game. Or if you do that to someone else, you win the game. So, for example, if this queen was here and the bishop was right here, the way you analyze a checkmate, like you see this queen is on the other side and this king is right here. You first want to ask, like, can your king move anywhere? And see that it's surrounded by other pieces, so it can't move anywhere. The next thing you ask is, can I capture the piece that's attacking me? So there's nothing that can directly take the queen, so there's nothing that can stop the check. So no. And because like you can't move your king and you can't stop the check, then you lose from there. Another important concept is the check. So if I have my queen right here, I'm directly attacking the king. But in chess, like to keep the game competitive, if you are attacking the king, you have to let it be known. Like if I made this move and then the enemy like just moved their pawn, I take the king and win the game. But that's not. They could have easily stopped this check and like the game could have gone on. So you're supposed to, when you directly attack the king, you're supposed to say verbally check, and then your opponent has to do something to stop it. Like they're not allowed to not do it or they can forfeit. So in this case, like you ask, can the king move anywhere? Well, it could move here, but it'd still be in check by the queen. So no. Then you ask, can anything take the queen? No, not in this case. But one more thing you can do, which I forgot to say earlier, is can I block it? So this pawn could move up one, and then it would no longer be in check, and it would actually be threatening the enemy queen. If this is the case, then you're no longer in check, and then you basically survive another turn. The only like definitive end to the game is checkmate. And that's what you want to aim for, and that's all the strategy goes for in chess. So I might be going kind of fast over this, but there's a lot of good resources online if you search like check or checkmate and find out these general concepts. And once, like, they're simple things. It's a lot easier to do with graphics or something like that. And if you play a couple games yourself, you'll understand like when you're winning, when you're losing, and what happens like that. And so now getting on to some of the special moves in chess that you should know. First off is castling. You're going to want to do this in every game. What it means is that you switch, which is why, this is also why the rook is sometimes called a castle. If you have the rook on either side and the king in his starting position, and none of these pieces have moved yet, then you can go move the king 2 spaces and move the rook to the other side of the king. Again, your king and rooks have to be in the starting positions, and then you can move the king 2 spaces to the side of the rook, and then move the rook to the other side. It is uneven because the queen would like be leaving an empty void in the spot. So on one side you'd have like more space for the king. Like on this side there's 1 space, but if you castle this way, there'd be 2 spaces. So that's a distinction that is made on which side you want to castle. This side is called queen side. This side is called king side. So generally, when you do castle, it's generally decided that king side castling is better in most situations, in most like lines, in most openings, because it is safer. For example, if I castled right here, then this pawn is completely left undefended. And if anything was attacking this, it could come in and maybe like put me in checkmate in the next move. It depends on the situation, obviously. But if you're on this side and you castle, then all these pawns are being defended by the king, and you'd be safe the turn after you castle. And another important distinction is if you are wanting to castle, you can't do it when you're in check. If something's attacking your king and your opponent says check, and you could easily, like, the opponent says check, they're attacking me with their bishop, and I could easily like move 2 spaces and have my rook here, and then not even my rook would be attacked after that. But that's illegal. You're not allowed to do that. And another situation is if you see the bishop's right here and it's attacking this space right here, and it's not attacking my king right now, and right here. It's attacking where the queen was, right next to it, and it's not attacking my king right now, and if I castled through, it would not even like attack my king after the fact. So if I did castle, it would look like this, but that's also illegal. If your king is in check for one of the spaces it castles through or into, it's not allowed. So if you want to block your opponent's castle, you don't have to attack the king directly, but you can just attack the space next to it, and that will stop them from castling. And obviously, like, both sides can also castle, and it's like chess is a symmetrical game. The only part that's uneven is the fact that white goes first. Other than that, like, everything white can do, everything black can do, the other side can do as well. So it would just be the same on this side, queen side, king side, and these pieces just have to leave the area to have an open space. Like, you can't castle over another piece. For example, if you had the knight right here and you'd castle like this, it's not taking up a space in the end result, but you can't like have the rook jump over the knight in order to do that. So that's just also not allowed. Okay, so another special move I said earlier is that you can't have a piece come back from the graveyard or anything like that, like other games might. So but one thing that you can do is exchange the pawn into a different piece as long as it reaches the last square on the board. So if I got my white pawn. I moved it 1 space, 2 space, 3 space, 4 space, 5 space, 6 spaces from its initial position into the last rank where the rook initially was on the other side. Then it would turn into whatever piece I wanted. And there's like seldom a situation where you wouldn't have the pawn turn into a queen, and you basically have either a new queen or 2 queens that would basically like crush the other side. So obviously you're not going to be able to do this in like the first 6 moves of the game. It's generally something important in like higher levels of play is you may like see like it may not look like your opponent has a big advantage if they like give up a pawn, or you have like 2 more pawns than they do, even if you have the same number of knights and bishops. Once you get to like the very end of the game, like where there's only like a few pieces left, you have maybe 1 knight, they have a bishop, and your kings, but you have 2 more pawns than they do. You can easily like force them down, like and like have like a bodyguard, an army behind them, like your king like is surrounding the other side, so the pawns are able to make it through and eventually turn into a queen. And with that, like, so it's important to like keep your pawns alive, don't just like throw them away, but obviously like you can sacrifice them for another goal. And it's not going to happen every game as well, but if you see that happening, you just have to like force them down to the other side and give them protection, and that way they're able to become a queen or anything like that. So that's another special move that you will sometimes see, although castling you'll see every game almost. And this you'll see maybe 5-10% of games, something like that. Only if it gets to like 50-60 moves. Okay, one other special move that you're going to see every game as well is pawns moving 2 spaces. I mentioned this earlier, but it's basically that if a pawn is in the starting position, hasn't moved at all, then it can move 2 spaces forward. And another important thing to note is that pawns can't go backwards. Once they're forwards, they're stuck there. And so you can have your pawn go 2 spaces or 1 space. An important concept in chess is controlling the center. So one of the most common openings is king's pawn to e4, which is right here. And if you have it here, it's threatening this space. It has it's able to move to this space, and it has a lot of presence in the center. And something the opponent will do to counter it is move their pawn out. So these 4 center spaces in the board are probably the most important spaces in the early game. If you control those, you're able to move out your knights, move out your bishops, and the game goes a lot easier if you have like solid control over the center, because you can go left side or right side. If the king castles the other direction, you can easily like change the momentum of the game by controlling the center. A lot of like what I learned when playing chess was these general concepts like control the center, castle king side, things like that. And if you know that, you don't have to memorize like every opening there is and every line that comes from it if you're like just trying to play like general competitive chess. But if you do like know these like basic things, then you are going to be a better player than most people you see. Even if you both like know how to play the game, knowing like these general concepts, this general theory is going to give you a leg up in the game. Now, one more special move before like we get onto more theory is called en passant. When I first learned this as a kid, my mom would not believe this was a real thing. Like she would never honor it when I made the moves. So it's in the rule book and you should always play with it. It wasn't in the game for a long time. It was like recently as in 100 to 200 years ago. It was recently added in the game because I guess games were too stale without it. But how it is that if you have a pawn set up right here, if you moved it 3 spaces from its starting position. And that's the prior setup that you need. And then your opponent being like black in this side, or this side right here that you're seeing. If this side moved it 2 spaces like that, then you slide over and it kills the pawn. Again, if you have a pawn that's 3 spaces from the center, from its starting position, and your opponent tries to move 2 spaces forward, right next to you, you're able to slide directly behind it and capture it. This is the only time a piece doesn't have to like directly head into the other piece to capture it. It is rarely seen, but it is an important move to know, and it can like just change the pace of a game if say you're playing online in a tournament or like for money or something like that. A lot of time I won't expect my opponent to know about en passant if I'm playing online, and I'll do it and I'll make a move that would allow them to do it, and they just don't do it as a result, and I just get away with it. But if more people like know about en passant and they called me out on it, I'd just be throwing games away. And as a result, I would. It's an important thing to know. So it only happens if you like already have your pawn out a lot, and and the other person would have to move right next to you. But it's something you don't see all the time, and it's something that you should know regardless. And now that's basically all the special moves there are. It's not chess isn't a very like intricate game with like a lot of like things to memorize, or there are, but like the basic concept isn't like heavy on this like intricate moves. So getting onto the theory, one thing that is very important to know is when you have a lot of situations, say like you're able to trade a knight for a bishop, you may be wondering like if it's worth it. Like if you have your knight here and they have their bishop over here, you could like easily like capture it and they could take you back. But you may be wondering like why would you ever like go 1-for-1 in a situation like that? But while there may be an equal amount of pieces on both sides, there are like differences in the importance of pieces even if they are the same. So let me start off by showing a quick trick you can pull on most inexperienced players. It's known as like the 4-move checkmate, and it doesn't have a lot. They don't have to like play into it really. They just have to like not stop it. So if you move your king's pawn, they follow it. This is a common opening. Then you move your bishop out over here, so it's attacking the pawn right here. The pawn directly diagonal to the king. This is one of the weakest points on the board, primarily for this reason. They can do whatever. Say they move out their knight to protect their pawn. Then you can move out your queen either here or here. If it's here, you can do a lot of like tricks with this pawn, but it's generally safer and a much better idea if you are going to have the queen out so early to put it closer to your side so it can easily like get in a safer position. Then they can do something else. Say they move out their bishop. Then 4 moves into the game, you just move right here and it's checkmate. The king cannot move anywhere and the queen is protected. So as a result, you just ended the game in 4 moves. This can also be done in like 6 moves, 7 moves, 8 moves. You can pull this out like late, like in these like beginning parts of the game, and it basically like will like stop a lot of early players in their tracks. And when I first learned this, I would try it almost every game. So as a result, you can see that there is like a difference in value of these like pawns because there are weaker points on the board. So this pawn is like one of the weakest points, and is why like you want to castle generally very early in the game. So you move out your bishop and it's attacking this pawn. So now if you have, like, say you have an opportunity now, you have a knight over here, but the bishop is being defended. You have this knight that you can trade for this bishop, or say it was another bishop that you would trade for this bishop. And say if you took it, then it'd just be taken back, and the queen, and say by a knight or something like that. But this bishop is the one that attacks this square, the bishop that's the same color as the queen on either side is more valuable than the one that's opposite to the queen. So if you have these opportunities to go trade 1-for-1 with this bishop, it's generally a good idea to take it, depending on the value of your piece and the position you're in. But if you have these opportunities, analyze the situation and then take it if it seems good. So the same goes for black. It's not as important because black doesn't generally get to play as aggressive as white does. But if you are able to take the dark squared bishop from black as white, then that is a big win in the early parts of the game. But once you start, even when you castle on black, say you're like this, you have this pawn right here, which is the same color as on the same color, light colored square, and that pawn is as vulnerable as this pawn right here, because you're easily able to move your queen in. That's also checkmate. So you want to keep, if you're white, you want to keep that alive. If you're black, you want to kill it if you have the opportunity. And one more technique is called a fork. Here's an example of it. Say your opponent moves out the queen early in the game, and you have your knight coming out. It's one move out of its starting position, then one move out into the middle of the board, and they can do whatever. But if they haven't moved this rook or this king, you're able to move into this spot and it's check. You're attacking the king while it's also attacking the rook. This is called a fork, and what this means is that they have no choice but to either move their king, either take your knight, which they can't do, or move their king, which they have to do. And then you're able to take their rook and probably keep your knight alive. And this is a positive exchange that can win you the game if you're up in material like this. So that's something to keep in mind, and it can be seen in a variety of ways. For example, like this, you're attacking the queen and the king, and so they have a choice. They either move their king and lose their queen, or lose the game. And coming up on a queen and trading it for a knight or something like that is a huge advantage that will almost always win you the game. And one last one to learn before ending is called a pin. If you have it's done with a bishop, it's sort of similar to the fork. It means that if you have a bishop if there's a piece that's in front of the king, this also can be done with a rook on a horizontal way, because bishops and rooks are similar in that way. But if you have a piece that's directly attacking the king, but there is a piece in front of it, this piece can obviously not move. Otherwise, the king's going to be in check, and you can't move. You can't put your king into check, put your own king into check. Otherwise, that would be losing you the game. But so you either have to take it, or you have to keep it in place or block it. So this is another powerful move that can turn the tide of games. For example, if there is no way for if you have the queen pinned to the king, and you have like there's no like way to block it. Like this pawn would normally be right here and able to stop it, but the queen's only choice, the like most logical choice, is to take the bishop, then you lose the queen. So that's trading a bishop for a queen. And in the terms of the general point value, that's 3 points for the bishop traded for the 8-point queen. So you have for the rest of the point value, rooks are 5, pawns are 1, knights are 3, bishops are 3, queens are 8, and same for all the other ones. And so in like your calculus, you want, if you're deciding between trading like a rook for a knight, they are worth 2 more points. So that's a good indication that that's a good trade. And if you are like if it's later in the game and you want to see if you are standing a chance, you can calculate your pawns into it, and they are worth 1 point. So if they may have like an extra knight, may have like a knight and a bishop, and you may have like just a knight, but you also have 3 pawns. So I'd say like you're generally even in the game because you have the same point value. It's a rough estimate, and it doesn't take into account, like for example, the queen colored bishops are worth the same as the other colored bishops, even though the queen colored bishops are generally more powerful in the game. So it's not like it's not a perfect measure, but it's a good estimate. So that's all for today. With this knowledge, you'd be able to go into a chess game and try to put out the forks, try to do some of the other tricks, what en passant is, how the pieces move, which side to castle on, the form of checkmate, which pieces, where to attack on the board. And I hope that with this knowledge, you'll be able to start winning some chess games and come back next week and you can win some more. Thanks.